Podcast Wydziału Historii Uniwersytetu Warszawskiego.
Historia na dwa głosy.
The Faculty of History, University of Warsaw in English, because of two hosts of today. I am pleased to see Dr. Giorgio Campi and Dr. Hagai Olszanecki, two scholars working here in the Faculty of History. Hagai, can we start with you? Can you tell what is your specialty? What do you work on? What is your field of expertise?
Right, so I work on a few topics broadly defined from the Assyrian to late antiquity to the Islamic conquest.
So we
more
are
or less
ancient
from,
history.
Yes, from the I'm in the ancient history department in the Faculty of History here in Warsaw. And I worked on several things. The main one, which was also my PhD thesis originally, is about Jews in non-Jewish armies in antiquity. And I mainly worked on the Hellenistic and the Roman armies, but also a bit on earlier ones like the Persian and the Assyrian. I also worked on Jewish gladiators, so similar Jews as part of Roman society, also in anything to do with fighting, with warfare. A bit about Jews as slave traders and slave owners, and at the moment, I'm more concentrating on the Persian and early Hellenistic period as part of the project The Dawn of Monotheism here in the faculty.
Okay. Giorgio, what about you? What is your
hello, everybody. So I am also an ancient historian, but I am focusing much more on religious matters than anything else. And my PhD was actually about the application of modern scholarship of the concept of monotheism when we study ancient Israeli religion, which is a misnomer, so to say. And now I am working here at the Faculty of History on a different topic. I am exploring mainly the religion, or the religions in the plural, of the Judean communities in diasporic contexts. So especially in Egypt, but especially in Babylonia. So in Lower Mesopotamia, and I am mostly looking at relatively little known deities who were worshipped in these communities. So basically, this is my what I am doing right now, my field of interest.
Okay,
now.
But can we start to explain to our audience where do you come from? So where did you get your PhD, and what is your academic background?
Okay, so I am from Italy, and I got all my academic degrees in Italian universities, but in different ones. So I got my BA in classics at first from the University of Bologna in northern Italy. And then I moved to Padua to get my MA degree in religious sciences is the name of the faculty, so religious history basically. And that's when I started to study the Hebrew Bible. And I got this double degree at the University of Padua and the Ca' Foscari University in Venice. And then I moved back to Bologna for my PhD in Jewish studies, and so I completed my formation as a biblical scholar.
Mm-hmm. Hagai, what about you?
I think that yes. So all my degrees I did in Bar Ilan University in Israel, in Ramat Gan. I started actually in criminology and general history, and later I did an MPhil in general history, and then I started to work on Jews in the Roman army. And later on I had also an MS in archaeology and the land of history of Israel studies. I did an archaeological license, and then a PhD in classical studies about, as I said, Jews in the Hellenistic and Roman armies. Later I worked in a project, an SNSF project in the University of Basel in Switzerland on Egypt in the Roman period in the 3rd century, and I mainly focused on the Roman army there. And then I moved here to Warsaw to work in the project The Dawn of Monotheism, and I'm also teaching a few classes about both war and society and Judea-Palestina in the Hellenistic and Roman period.
Okay. Coming back to your PhD, can you in few sentences, can you explain to our audience what did you find out? What is the result of your studies on Jews in the non-Jewish armies?
So the entire story with the project and how I started to write my thesis, it started actually in my bachelor degree. And when I came to the university, I was sure everything was research and there's nothing to add. And eventually I found out that in most topics you have a lot to add, or most of them have not been explored. And I had a course about religions in the Hellenistic and Roman world, and I asked the professor there if I can write about Jews in the Roman army, if he knows about it. I had no idea. And I started to research the topic, and later it became my master's and eventually my PhD. And at the beginning, when you read the literature, it seems that there isn't a lot of research. On the Hellenistic, it's almost non-existent, and on the Roman, there was actually a lot of debate starting, especially in the 2000s, early 2000s, but everything was just about the question if there were any. And later, and many of the debates were what kind of Jews they were, and if they were good Jews, if they were adhering Jews.
What do you mean by good Jews?
And that is a great question, because it is something I'm still dealing with. And the problem is that the prism of many researchers, how they look about ancient Jews and about Judaism in general, is through the prism of modern Judaism. And that is an anachronistic viewpoint. And it was because that is the Judaism we know of. Most of the different streams of Judaism today are more or less coming from Orthodox Judaism, which is a late descendant of Rabbinic Judaism.
Okay, but if we get one step behind, so the good Jews means something of a Jewish self-identity, or Jewish religion, or Jewish ethnicity. What kind of discourse is involved here?
I think that it's mainly religious, and it's mainly derived from that the researchers, that in many of them are either no modern Jews or are modern Jews, are coming from a certain set or sect of Judaism, and they looked at Judaism in antiquity through that prism, and they also think that all ancient Jews, or hoped for many of them, that are similar to the modern ones.
So presentism in this dealing with ancient times.
Yes, and as I worked on the material, I understand with time that our main problem is that we are looking in that way. We should never look at ancient Jews as we are looking at modern Jews, because they are not the same.
I would say this is probably true also to modern and ancient Greeks, modern and ancient Romans, and people in Spain or whatever. We just differ from ancient times in many ways.
Yes, in many terms, especially when we are speaking about religion, culture, very different.
And Jews are not exemptions in this case.
No, actually, they are a prime example.
Okay, and what did you find out when you were working on this? There were many Jews in the armies. Were they praised? Were they of importance or less important people? Let's say Roman army.
If we look at the Roman army, also in other armies of antiquity, the Jewish presence is pretty hefty. I would say that they serve no less than their percentage in the general population, although what was their percentage in the general population is a question of itself that is hard to answer. But we see a lot of evidence, and interestingly, actually, after the Second Jewish Revolt at the beginning of the 2nd century CE, we do see even more evidence than before. So it seemed that after fighting the Romans, Jews, especially those from sects and groups that disliked the Romans or tried to resist and received independence from, accepted Roman rules eventually, and also started to be enlisted.
You were living in Palestine, Syria, wherever, you just accepted the Roman presence, and trying to have success in life went to army.
So we are speaking mainly about Judea-Palestine, because those in other places would more or less mainly accepted the Roman rule. The only other places that we have revolts are in Cyrenaica, which is modern-day Libya, in Egypt, and in Cyprus. Except that the rest of the Jewish communities, either Asia Minor, which is modern-day Turkey, or Syria and the area of modern-day Lebanon, more or less did not revolt. And so they only accepted. And we actually see a lot of Jews in the Roman forces in Syria. So it's very, very large presence, especially there.
Okay, we should avoid saying that the Jewish soldiers occupied Syria nowadays.
Yes.
It is a joke. What kind of sources did you work with to explore the question? Where the information can be found?
The sources are very diverse, and sometimes you need a lot of luck to find them, or even that a colleague would tell you, I've seen an interesting inscription, a text, do you know of it? Because there is no corpus accumulating all the data in one place. So it's really treasure hunting. And we have both Jewish texts, we have a lot of Roman texts mentioning it. We have it also in Christian text, legislation, especially late Roman legislation that actually forbid from Jews from serving, and that is already in the Christian period in the 5th and 6th centuries, and you don't forbid something that do not exist. Except that we have inscription, funerary inscriptions of people that have died and have Jewish elements, and also mention their career or position, including in the army.
Okay, hold on. Jewish elements. What do you mean by Jewish elements?
Of course, there is a debate regarding a lot of them, but some of the elements, like the menorah, is regarded...
Iconographical elements.
Yes.
Okay.
Although it could be also in language. How example? You write the inscription, or use, for example, letters or phrases in Hebrew, like shalom, the word for peace in Hebrew.
So there are traces showing that the person might have been Jew, because using the Jewish or Judaism symbols of iconographical or rituals or Hebrew language, right?
Yes.
If there are any, if there are no such traces, can you define a certain soldier that he was Jew, if it is not explicitly mentioned?
Yes, but that would be according to the name. However, that would rarely occur because most Jews took either a general Semitic name, general Hellenistic name, or general Latin name, and we can never know if they are actually Jews or not. So even if we have evidence for Jews, it's only a small fraction of how many were actually there.
Okay, if we have a Roman soldier with the name Haggai, we can assume he was Jew. If we have Theophilos or Paulus, we are not sure.
Yes.
Okay.
Interestingly, Haggai actually we don't have from the Roman period. We have from the Hellenistic, and I think that only one in 2 cases, and one of them is definitely a soldier.
Okay. If someone is looking for the text you were working at the PhD, is it published or can it be in parts found somewhere?
The PhD is, of course, deposited. I mean, it's written in Hebrew, but parts of it have already been published in English in several articles in several different journals.
We will put the links downstairs, down the transmission.
Right. So
there are articles where people can read more about your research.
Yes, of course.
Okay.
And I'm trying also, when possible, to publish also more popular articles for the general audience. So there are several of those too.
Great. Giorgio, now we are coming to Italian scholarship.
Okay.
What did you find out during your research on PhD?
Well, everything and nothing, so to say. So my PhD, as I was saying, was about the application of the concept and the term monotheism to the study of the religion of ancient Israel. And in particular, I decided to focus on a specific element embedded in our use of the term and the concept of monotheism, which is, it's included in the second part of the word, theism. So what is theos? What does it mean? What does it entail when we use the concept of monotheism? And especially, what does it mean to be the sole God in existence, which is the essence of when we speak of monotheism. It's like what we intend when we use the term.
Is it still the history of religion, or other semiotics, or something about language and
so
notion?
it was more of history of religion, because the first thing that I did for my PhD research was retrace the first uses of this term in modern times. So the term was coined during the 17th century by the Cambridge Platonists, in particular by More, and it was used as a polemic term, so to describe the idea that only one God existence and the other God were non-existent. So one of the most important things about this concept was the existence of the deity, so an abstract idea of divine existence. So I tried to apply this concept to the writings of the Hebrew Bible, basically, and I found out, well, I choose in particular 3 passages in the Hebrew Bible which are considered loci classici, so to say, of biblical monotheism, or at least like very controversial passages, to study this idea and to see if it would be possible to understand this passage in terms of, okay, when they claim that the God of Israel is one, they do claim that it is the only one existing, or they claim something else? So I studied Psalm 82. I studied what has been known as the Carmel contest, so a passage in the first book of Kings, in 1 Kings chapter 18, and finally a long poem included at the end of the book of Zechariah.
A very difficult one.
A very difficult text. Yes, Zechariah.
Okay, so
chapter
just to
14.
come, if I understood it correctly, in a early modern 19th and 20th century scholarship, the term monotheism is intended as the only one God religion, right?
Yes, well, it has been problematized over decades in scholarship, but no one pointed out actually that one of the most important things underpinned in our use of the term monotheism is that we use it to imply the existence of a god or more gods or no gods, while actually this is not a notion that it is inherent in the text of the Hebrew Bible.
So it is something coined in the European scholarship,
Exactly.
not in the sources.
Exactly.
And when you looked at the Hebrew Bible, what did you find? What is the kind of God which is presented in the passages you were studying?
Well, it depends, because they are different texts, so they present...
Just show us 2 examples.
Well, they present different portraits of gods. So, for example, in the passage of the Carmel contest, the prophet Elijah challenges the prophets of Baal, which is another god in the Syro-Levantine region. And he basically, when he say that the God of Israel is the only one, he is claiming that he is the only one able to fire the altars. So it's not the only one in existence, but he is the only one God which is powerful and has authority inside the domain of Israel, of the kingdom of Israel, which is a different thing that, like...
So outside Israel, he wouldn't?
Exactly.
So it is a locally limited.
It is a political statement. It has a political, let's say, a political background as an affirmation. While in Zechariah 14, it all comes down to the meaning of the Hebrew word for one, which is echad. So most scholars has understood the term echad in Zechariah 14 to mean one, so in the sense of numerical one, so the only one God in existence. But actually, this term might also have a different meaning, which does not exclude the idea of oneness, but it has a different nuance, which is the one of sameness. So it will be in the future, in the eschatological future, prospected in the poem of Zechariah 14. the God of Israel will not be one in absolute terms. So it will not be the one in existence, but it will be the same God for all people that will come to Jerusalem, to the Jerusalem temple.
So Had can mean the God, just as the concrete and the this one.
Yes.
In the sense not numerical, but
exactly
pointing to the.
But it will be one God in the sense that it will be the same God for you, me, and for all the people of the earth. So yes, it will be one, but we are not making a statement about his existence. We are making a different kind of statement, which involves the religious affiliations of foreign nations.
What about other gods? Did they, according to the authors of the Hebrew Bible, did they exist, or they are just demons or inexisting vain?
Well, it's a very difficult question because the Bible is not one text. It's a lot of different texts that have been edited over centuries and centuries. So there is no there's not one single answer to that question.
So you see the difference in perceiving other gods?
Yeah, probably by the times of the rabbinical exegesis, for example, the idea that the other gods were non-existent or were just demons with respect to the God of Israel was, of course, something that was real. But that was not so when the first texts of the Hebrew Bible were being composed, were being written at first. So there's no single answer to that question. It's actually a very difficult one.
And when we come back to the Haggai's material, probably other gods, even for the good Jews, still existed. If we imagine their amulets and daily life, with they surrounded by the so-called pagan gods, and they might have faced the other deities. Did they?
Of course, in all periods you have the other. Jews are not alien, they are not singular, and they are not isolated. But it also means that they also influence the pagan beliefs. And especially, actually, if we go back to Syria, you see that there is a belief in what is called the anonymous God. And this belief is becoming very widespread in the 2nd century CE, and it's most probably influenced by Judaism, especially in cities like Palmyra. And also, like the joke that you mentioned earlier, the difference between Israelis, if we see them in Syria, and Jews of then in Syria, the Jews then were Syrians. And they were actually a very considerable percentage of the general population there. And they were also heavily present in the armies, in the local politics, and so on. So it's really very different than what we see today, which is always what is hard for us to grasp and also to move from one reality and from one period to another.
Okay, we like, as ancient historians, just to see the usefulness of our research to the understanding of contemporaneous world, but maybe let's stick with the Hebrew Bible and the Jews in antiquity for a while. Haggai, you mentioned that now you are focusing more on Hellenistic and Persian period. Can you say a few words? What are you working on currently?
So, it's about the project is about Judaism and Jewish identity and monotheism, and it's exactly about how the Jews perceived themselves, the other, and their identity. And I'm working a bit on Jews in the Persian and the Pharaonic armies, but I mainly work on Jews under the Ptolemaic in Egypt after Alexander conquered the Persian Empire. One of his prized possessions was Egypt. And Ptolemy was one of the generals of Alexander, and eventually he created a dynasty that ruled Egypt, and they were known since then as the Ptolemaic dynasty, and they took local traditions and declared themselves as pharaohs. And the Jews served them in the army and also in many other positions, and it's very interesting to see how actually they coexisted, how the Jews served, how they accepted this regime, how they lived under theoretically a living God. It's true for the Pharaonic and the dynasties before, the Persian period and the Hellenistic period. And this is exactly the material I'm working on to see how they saw themselves. And also the idea, if we're looking about Judea-Palestina, that changed hands. There were a lot of wars between the Ptolemaic dynasty and another dynasty that came from one of the generals of Alexander, the Seleucid Empire. And they eventually conquered the land, and the Jews, the Hashmonean, revolted in the 2nd century. And a lot see it as a Jewish revolt, as a popular revolt, but it was completely something different. And their identity of the Hashmonean is something I'm working on, because it's very relevant, because it's to understand who are the Jews, how they perceive themselves, and if we perceive them correctly.
Mm-hmm. So mostly about 3rd and 2nd century BCE in Egypt, in Palestine. Interesting. Giorgio, what is on your desk? What are you currently working on?
Well, the most important questions are the same, I guess. So Jewish identity, and what did it mean to be a Jew, and what did it feel to be a Jew, and how did they represent themselves, but in a different context. I am not working on the same time, with the same time frame as Haggai. I am working a little bit, I'm focusing a little bit before, so mainly from the 6th to the 5th century BCE.
So Babylonian and early Persian period.
Exactly. Technically, it's late Neo-Babylonian and early Achaemenid, which was the dynasty that ruled the Persian Empire in those times, and early Achaemenid period between the 6th and 5th centuries in absolute terms. And in particular, I am looking at, well, there are mainly 2 lines of research on my table right now. The first one deals with these very particular, little-known deity of Syrian origin. The name of this deity was Baitil. And it has very interesting history, because we have relatively few sources mentioning this deity, and the vast majority of these sources are anthroponyms, so personal names.
So in this, like the term theophoric means that the someone's carrying a personal name with God's name inside. So in Polish we have Boży Dar, which is translated to Hebrew as Netanyahu. So the term, the name is coined with usage of the God's name.
Exactly. Well, Netanyahu is technically a theophoric anthroponym, a theophoric personal names, just as Theophilus, for example.
And you have similar cases in Baitil.
Yes, very, very.
How many?
Many of them. Well, I'm not able right now to make an estimate, but like in tens and
hundreds.
No, in the tens. Yes, in the tens.
Okay.
It is not a very popular.
So not like Marduk or
Nabu. No.
Which
it's not a very popular deity in absolute terms. But what is interesting is that the evidence we have for these gods, so these anthroponyms mainly, it is heavily concentrated in the 6th and 5th century. We have just very scant sources before. It is attested since the 7th century in a treaty between Esarhaddon, so the king of Assyria, and a king of Tyre in the Levant. But we have very scant evidence before the 6th century. And the evidence is heavily concentrated in those 2 centuries. And what is most important to my questions for the research is that people bearing these kind of names are always found in proximity with Jews, so in Jewish communities, in Judean communities of the diaspora, so in Al-Yahudu, in the outskirts of Nippur, in Babylonia, or in Elephantine in the case of Egypt.
We should explain the places. Why do they are so important for you, the Al-Yahudu and Elephantine?
Because 2 Judean communities live there. So
okay.
There were 2 Jewish settlements, very different from each other, of course, but they were settlements where a lot of Jews lived. So we have the most evidence we have comes from those places.
This is our historical reconstructions based on sources we have. So we have for 100 years the Aramaic papyri and ostraka from southern Egyptian island called Elephantine, where the Persian soldiers garrison existed, and many people can be identified as Yahwistic. Then we will come up with the question whether are Jews, Judeans, or Yahwists, because it's not necessarily the same. And similarly, recently, the scholars just learned about the corpus of cuneiform text from Al-Yahudaya, the place in Mesopotamia where settlement of the Judeans appear in our sources.
Yes, the documents from Al-Yahud are cuneiform documents, not an archive, so to say, of cuneiform documents, but it had a troubled history, so to say, because the tablets comprising these archive or these archives in the plural do not come from archaeological excavations, but rather from private collections, and these meant that we have no archaeological context for these material, and
we should say more. It is about ethical issue, because it is probably during one of the occupation periods by the soldiers of USA, someone, we don't know who, excavated unofficially a site, digged the place and found the cuneiform text and sold it to the private collection. Yeah. By law, it shouldn't be recognized by scholarly community, because it was excavated not according to the law of the state, the Iraq.
This also meant like a lot of difficulties in the publication of this material, and they have been publishing it since the 90s, but it comes from 3 different private collections: the Musayev collection, the Sofer collection, and the Shuyan collection. And so we had like a couple of publications in the 90s and over the noughties, so the 2000s, but the most important ones are quite recent. We have the 28th installments of the CUSAS series, with the publication of a lot of texts in 2014, and then last one, it's the 6th installment of the Babylonische Archiv series by Islet Verlag, which was published just in 2022.
We will put the links to the publications below the video. I
am not sure they are open access.
No, they are not, but just a bibliographical. It is kind of thing. It comes with the ethical issue in the daily life of ancient historians. We have to face such problems because it is extremely interesting. It offers us new material, which it changes our view, but we have to have doubts if they are illegally excavated.
Yeah.
Okay. Another question I would like to ask is not about your research, but about your stay in Poland. How did you find yourself in Poland in comparison to your country you come from, or when you see the scholarly environment here in the Faculty of History? Hagai, what about you? Do you like staying in Warsaw?
Yes, it's also very different from the other places that I've been in the past.
It is good or bad?
It is nice. I like the weather. Israel is a bit too warm.
You like the weather?
It's not that bad. But I feel also that maybe it's also because of global warming, because I feel that the winter here is not that bad. And
outside is -2 today.
For me, it's not that bad. But also this is the exception. I think for most of the winter it was not that cold. And I hear from the Polish colleagues that they don't remember something like that in their lifetime. So yes, it's worrying, but we need to live with what we have at the moment.
Okay, it was about temperature, and now about scholarship.
Scholarship. The other thing is also that the cities here are way prettier. The cities in Israel are not the best designed usually. So the cities here are beautiful.
But we
Warsaw
are
is
trying
beautiful.
to say
But academically-
optimistic, not so nothing bad about Israeli cities. Well,
Right.
some praises
So,
about Warsaw, okay, but
All right, but if you're talking about the people, I really like the faculty because people work together. People are kind to each other, and that is something unfortunately too rare in not only in academia but in job places in general. And I must say that the place that I felt the most warm and most hospitable from all the workplaces I had in academia and otherwise. So this is why I really like the place.
thank you.
Well, for me, this is my very first experience abroad, academically speaking, and as a working experience. And I must say, I am loving it. And I think it depends, well, not just on Warsaw and on the lovely environment that we have here in the faculty, but also on my personal past experience. So I started my PhD at the end of 2019. So COVID struck right after it, and I spent most of the first year of my PhD and also most of the other 2 years basically doing research alone. So what Hagai was saying is that the people help each other and the people work together has been incredibly, it has been like very, very shocking to me, so to say, in a positive way. And I really discovered that research and academia are collective enterprises. They are not just something that you do when you are seated at your desk alone. Well, a lot of it is like, yes, being seated at your desk and reading stuff and writing down stuff, but it's also the exchange of ideas, and that's what Warsaw and the Faculty of History has taught me about research, and I think it is very important. So,
Okay, now question for the historians, but about future. Where do you see yourself in 10 years from now? So, intending 2035, Giorgio, where and what doing would you see yourself in your dreams?
good dreams or bad dreams?
Good dreams. We are not interested in the nightmares.
Well, I have two scenarios. One is a bad one, so I won't tell you about that.
No, we are not going to listen. But good one, please.
And the other one, well, hopefully I will still work in academia with more established position. Maybe not, maybe a position, tenure track, I'd say. So one thing that scares me a lot is the fact that in your early career experience, you have to move a lot. And this doesn't let you stay put in a place, and it's more difficult to have meaningful, long-lasting relationships with the people around you, and that scares me a lot. So I would like to stay put for a little bit and have a position that allows me to do so.
Stability because of social relations, or stability because of the research environment?
Well, both of them. I would like to find a nice place to work, but also a nice place to stay, like to live in. Mm-hmm. And I am afraid that in the first year of my career that won't be possible, but eventually in 10 years maybe, so I hope so.
We cross fingers. Hagai, where Hagai Olshanecki will be in 2035 in the best version of his dreams?
You want the best versions. Unfortunately, I think that, as Giorgio put it, the other versions are the more common or more probable usually for anyone in academia. It's a pretty brutal business today.
Okay. $1 lottery.
All right, on the lottery, as Giorgio said it, you get the 10-year position. You don't need to think about every year applying for another job. Eventually, yes, in many of the starting jobs, you just deal with research, which is amazing, and most of the people in academia would prefer it because you work on what you want. But because you look for a job all the time, you use most of your time for looking for the job for the next year instead of actually working on anything. So even if you have a position that you are teaching, at least when you are teaching, you contribute to someone. You learn from the experience. You give someone to someone else. Most of looking for a job gives nothing to no one. It's just a waste of time. So yes, a job in one place is amazing. Not that I don't like seeing new places to meet new people. It's just that I want to use my time for the most and contribute as much.
Okay. These were two postdocs with their dilemmas and the questions they posed themselves about future. So if anyone knows about lottery, they can win a high prize to continue their research, please let them know. The links to the CV of both of them and the most important publications will be posted below the link, and we cross fingers that you manage to succeed in your project. So
thank you very much.
Thank you for your visit.